the verticality in how we value art. This is elevated language. This is high art, highbrow, lowbrow. There's this very, I think, biblical or perhaps even Christian verticality that anything that's elevated is better than what is below. And I think there's a great myth and a great fraudulence in that thinking. And I think I was always skeptical of it because of the people who raised me. They were working class refugees, and I didn't see them as low. They saw themselves as low in society because they were doing manual labor, and my mother and my family were very intimidated by wealth and power, as many people are. But to me, they were my heroes. They were the adults. I thought they could do anything because I saw them work. I saw them manage, particularly in the nail salon. They are professors of beauty. They are the proprietors of beauty. And how powerful to have beauty in your hands to the point where you can make someone more beautiful by caring properly for their skin and their nails and their feet, right? The lowest part of your body. But to care for the lowest part of your body is to elevate you towards self-dignity. And so I think for me, that perspective instilled in me a perennial skepticism of what we talk about when we talk about high and low art. I think everything is possible. And I think the artist's work, at least my work, I hope, is to actually flatten the hierarchy into something else. Because when we no longer look up, because when you have a hierarchy, you think about pyramids, towers, when the higher you go, the less space there is. The higher you look, there's less to see. The foundation is very wide and robust. But if we were to flatten all of it, we now get to see everyone, and we can see everything in one glance, right? We no longer have to abandon the bottom to look for the top. There's a horizontal approach. And for me, that is actualized through my obsession with trying to capture the importance of everything. The minutiae and the grand all has room on one stage. And you can manipulate that in the space of literature. Literature allows for that space in ways that sometimes the systemic material world excludes. There's a great dichotomy and a tension between flattening the hierarchies as a maker and then flattening hierarchies as social structures. And let's not pretend those things are two very different things. And I can only control what I can. And for me as a writer, I could do that on the page. There are things on the page you can do that you can suggest a new hierarchy or flattening hierarchies on the page that will never work, at least not yet, or will take so much more collective material change to do in the world. But it's not lost on me that it's a great privilege to read a book. You know, we often think everyone reads and everyone goes to libraries, but, you know, illiteracy, but not only illiteracy, the evacuation of the working class from experiencing literary culture. When I mean that, I mean literary culture in the way books are bought and sold, right? In America, it's $30 for a hardback book. That's a huge chunk of someone's paycheck. Not only that, it takes 7, 8, 10, 15 hours to read a book. In my childhood, none of the adults that I knew had that much time. They worked from 8 to 9, and then they had to feed themselves and their families. They had no time to read. They had no time to put all that in. So the idea of the book as a possession of power, I think, should be interrogated in terms of access. And, you know, there's a lot to be said about more access writers have to books, but I think there's even more about how many readers have the opportunity and the luxury of time and space to read a book. And it's not lost on me that a lot of the people I grew up with, the class that I've grown up with, not can't read my work, but has a great challenge, right? They have to fight for their ability to read. And that is not always true with the dominant class. And that's the great sorrow. You talk about sorrow, and I think to be a writer coming out of the working class and then entering the middle class through the profession of a professor and a writer is to experience grief. There's a ghosting of your experience. The more you create, the more you leave behind, the more you betray what you've done. And my goal for myself is to bring the tools that I learned, the innovations of working class people into my work and legitimizing that as creative values. And it begins with a deep interrogation of highbrow methods, right? And we think about highbrow, literature of the middle class, right? From Virginia Woolf to Proust, to Ray Carver, Salinger, right? The crisis of the individual amongst the city, within the population, often with servants, right? And to me, it's not to say that those works aren't ambitious or powerful, but it's important to say that the theater of humanity, the theater of human condition, is much wider, and the other theaters, the other experiences are not better or worse, but just as legitimate. And we have a lot to do still. I think we don't talk enough about vulnerability as a normal condition. We often see vulnerability as weakness, but when you talk to somebody, even just for half hour, you realize that all sorts of people in every category, every identity marker are vulnerable. That vulnerability is the most normal human condition I've ever encountered as a person spending 33 years on Earth. And I think we build barriers to hide it. We build mechanisms out of the shame of the vulnerable. But the vulnerable is actually more normal, more human than bravado or even irony or the masculinist mask of power. That is very brief. Those are brief performances. But vulnerability is actually the most pervasive. Out of 24 hours out of the day, I would argue that the majority of those hours are spent feeling vulnerable. And we do everything we can to hide that because we have relegated that out of what is acceptable in society. So I tell my students to bring down the shield that you have been taught since you were in kindergarten, to fortify that shield and to take down the armor and to step out into your work and your world and to collaborate with your vulnerability is the most powerful and strengthening thing you can ever do as an artist, is to say that my vulnerability is my power because it is where all care comes from. It is where all the desire for improvement and my connection to others, my compassion comes from my understanding that I am as a species, I'm a very soft species, right? I'm a very weak species physically, perhaps even mentally. And there's something to say about the desire to destroy vulnerability. So much in our culture, we see in entertainment, books, news articles, the arenas of recreation and sports even, and how we celebrate each other is to destroy vulnerability. But the problem is that vulnerability, ironically, is the strongest thing. It can never be destroyed. It is always there. And the more we allow it to come forward And the more we are forgiving of each other for expressing vulnerability, I think the stronger you can be, both as a writer, a student, and a human being.